Hi, it's John Kelly. In this module, we are going to discuss audit planning. And as always, we want to be efficient and effective, follow professional standards, and document what we have done properly. Now, this is going to be a very short module, but it's extremely important. And if you want to be efficient and effective in an audit, you've got to do planning, and it's got to be done at the beginning of the audit. And one of the things that constantly surprises me is the amount of time I see people spending avoiding planning. And I guess my question is, why do you spend so much time and effort trying to avoid doing audit planning when doing it at the beginning would make your life so much simpler? And I think the first answer to that is that planning can make you think really hard. So it's much easier to go, oh, just go start the audit. I think everything's the same. Just go do it. The problem with that is at the review stage, you're going to have all kinds of questions and comments and things that you knew about that you didn't let the audit team know. That means the audit should have been done differently. So there'll be all kinds of time and effort at the end that you could have avoided if you'd done planning at the beginning. The other thing I see people doing is they try to substitute documentation of planning with actual planning, and that again also takes loads of extra time. And I don't think planning needs to take a lot of time. It will take some thinking, but particularly in a small client, things may not have changed much. And the partner is in a unique position to know that. And you do have to do some risk assessment procedures to find if that is in fact true. So some stuff needs to be done up front, but planning at the beginning will save you a lot of time and effort at the end. Now, symptoms of bad planning. I see this all the time. The most junior person on the team is doing the planning, and of course it needs partner input. And they're doing the planning as the last thing they do as the audit is wrapping up. Well, you're really only doing planning to produce pretty documentation of planning, and you're probably left with a mess at the end, too many review notes, and all kinds of the review notes are, why didn't you do this? And if staff were not being so polite, they would say, well, you never told me to do that. If you'd wanted me to do that, you should have told me at the planning stage, and you didn't. So planning is really important. Now, some people say, well, I know what planning is. I will have a meeting of all staff other than the partner and call that planning. Well, of course, that's not planning. The partner input is necessary, and the standard says that. The standard says that planning is partner and senior staff discussions, not a meeting. It could be a meeting, but it's discussions. It's getting together. It's sticking your head in someone's office. It's going and doing some risk assessment procedures. It's having a chat about it, and then producing an audit plan. But I suppose on the other hand, you have a big meeting and you take minutes and you call it planning and you put that in the file. You've got pretty documentation. You have a date and you have a list of all the people that attended, and you call it planning. Probably not. Other people I see say, well, let's just develop the plan as the audit progresses. We'll just start doing stuff, and as the audit progresses, we'll develop the plan. And of course, you have to revise the plan as needed. And one of the last things you should do in an audit is stop and say, and think about it and say, did the audit go in accordance with the plan? Was there anything that arose that we didn't expect? And if it did, have we dealt with it? The smaller the audit, the less likely that is to occur. The larger the audit, the more likely that is to occur. But planning needs to be done at the beginning, not at the end. And with no plan, the big risk is that you will miss a risk of material misstatement. That's the risk of doing a bad audit. So that's a really significant risk. Without the plan, it increases the likelihood of you doing that. The other thing you are probably likely to do with no plan is spend time where there is no risk of material misstatement, or rather the risk of material misstatement is low. And one of the things that the risk model tells us, one of the key messages is, if risk of material misstatement is low, do little audit work. Spend your time where risk of material misstatement is higher. So that's the key message of the risk model. And if we don't plan and we don't assess risk of material misstatement and we don't design procedures in response, we're going to end up doing too much work. Now, an example that a colleague told me just today. He went into a partner's office. This was quite a while ago. Went into a partner's office and said, I'm ready to go out and start the audit. And the partner said, yeah, go ahead. Everything's about the same as it was last year. Came back, having completed the audit, done all the things he should do, following along from last year. And the review query was, well, did we count the inventory held at the new outside location? And he now says what he should have said to the partner was, well, why didn't you tell me to do that at the planning stage? Of course I didn't. I didn't know about it. You knew about it and you never told me. Of course I didn't do it. So they were stuck in the situation that he was, of course, embarrassed that he hadn't done something that now was obvious that he should have done, but he didn't know about it. And he had to rush out at the last minute and under time pressure and, possibly missing a client deadline and do the necessary work on the inventory held in the external or the third-party warehouse. So that's not the way to do an audit, and that's a significant problem, and it was a possibility of a significant risk of material misstatement that wasn't addressed. Now, no plan and review notes at the end. If the review note says something like, why did you not test this, or why did you not test more? The response you should get. Now, staff, of course, are going to be polite, but they're going to say, well, you never told me. If you say, what about the risk of this, risk of fraud, the risk of phony expense reports, something? Well, you never told me. Or, if we had thought about that at the planning stage and done risk assessment procedures, we would have concluded that it was not a risk. Or we would have concluded at the planning stage that it was a risk and planned to do something about it, and then you wouldn't be asking me a review query. Couldn't this be wrong? Same as before, you never told me. Why did we only test 10? Well, you never told me. And should there not have been an audit program developed at the planning stage that said, okay, here's the sample size decision that I've made. Using professional judgment, let us pick 12. Where'd you get that from? Used professional judgment. No need to use statistical sampling. No need to use some mathematical model to select our sample size. We might have that in the back of our head, but partner, manager, sit down and agree, in the context, this client, this component, this assertion, 12. And not making that decision at the planning stage, because of course the staff, they're doing the best they possibly can. So they picked 10. You wanted 12. Well, you should have told them. So on and so on. You're assessing risk of material misstatement at the review stage, and that is messy and annoying and makes staff feel bad about themselves and makes staff want to try to decide to do something other than auditing. Now, the standards are actually simple and clear. Partner and senior staff are to do it. It's a discussion, not a meeting. And you are supposed to tell those not in on the discussion what was decided. Now, my interpretation of that would be that you would develop an audit program with procedures agreed to by the partner, sample sizes agreed to by the partner, approach agreed to by the partner, and then as you explain to staff what's going to be done, you will say, well, here's our assessment of risk of material misstatement by assertion. Written down on the same page are the reasons that we did that, so that we have all our reasons for assessing risk of material misstatement on one page, and that's directly connected to the procedures we're going to do in response, and an audit program developed in response to that, And staff are now going to go, alrighty, I'm going to go out and audit 12 of those, and I'm going to get a confirmation of the inventory held at the external warehouse, and it's going to come back in again at the end of the audit, and everything is going to be done the way it was specified, and you wouldn't get any of the queries on the previous page. Now, of course, you have to do risk assessment procedures. The standards list a long list of risk assessment procedures. You don't necessarily have to do every one. You can use some professional judgment to decide which are appropriate in the circumstances. But you must understand what has happened at the client this year and what may move risk of material misstatement above low. Because if it's moderate or high, you really need to be doing and designing very specific, well-developed, well-sharpened audit procedures to deal with those risks to make sure that they have not resulted in a misstatement in the financial statements. Now, having done risk assessment procedures in a small client, well, first of all, there may not be many that are relevant and there's not a lot of work to be done, but you do need to do something. And in a small client, you may find that there is very little risk of material misstatement, and therefore audit procedures can be minimal. So it's actually much more efficient and much less annoying to follow the standards, to have partner involvement early, to assess risk of material misstatement and agree on an audit program, procedures, and scope early, because then review is then simple. And I always say that any review query, I exaggerate, but any review query is a failure in planning or a failure in on-the-job supervision. And the ones on the previous slide were failures in planning. Those are things that should have been thought about and dealt with at planning, not asked at the review stage. And on-site, in-the-field review is really important because then questions and issues can be resolved in the field and on-site. Now, in a very small audit, maybe you can't do that. Maybe you have to, one person goes out, does the work, and comes back to the office. You're then going to have to accept that you weren't supervising in the field in real time, and there are going to be some more queries, but those queries are just, I should have been in the field supervising, but that wasn't efficient, so I didn't do it. So I bear a little efficiency penalty at the end. So, thanks for listening.